Hello, my name is Jess and I'm a mess. So today I'm going to tell you the story of my daughter's birth. I've had this channel for 4 years and my daughter is 4 years old, but I've never told this story. And the main reason is because there were a lot of things about her birth that were just upsetting to me, and I didn't want to have her birth be like a negative thing. I wanted to tell it in a positive light. So 4 years later, I see things a little differently. And yeah, there were some things that were really disappointing and frustrating about her birth, but medically everything went really well, and through it all we prayed and just God gave us peace. And he saw us through. So this was May 2021. I was 41 weeks pregnant and hadn't felt any contractions. The pregnancy had been like really smooth up until month 7. Then I started getting anemic, I started having gestational diabetes, and then I injured myself, and then I got PUPS, which is like this full body rash that happens when you're pregnant. And so it was a lot. And then everything was going well other than that. You know, the baby looked great and I was healthy. You know, I had figured out how to change my diet and take supplements to deal with the low iron and crazy blood sugar. But since I had a rash, they decided to test me for ICP. The short name is cholestasis. That's what the C stands for. And I think the P stands for pregnancy, but I don't remember what the I is. I'll put it on the screen. The symptom of that is a rash like on your hands and feet, from what I remember. I didn't have a rash on my hands and feet. I just had it like on my arms and on my legs and on my belly. But it was very uncomfortable. Thankfully, it was hot outside, so I could wear minimal clothing, but I just was very uncomfortable. So ICP is basically your liver overproduces bile, and then that gets in your bloodstream, which goes to the baby, and it can put them into distress and make them die very suddenly. So I tested positive for that, and I was planning a natural birth, a home birth. We had bought our own birth pool. We had the whole kit set up. Everything was ready to go. And then at the last minute, we found out that I had this dangerous condition, and so our midwives recommended that I be induced. And that was just really hard because nothing in me wanted to go to the hospital. I was it wasn't even a last resort kind of thing. It was it's not even an option. I will never go to a hospital. I don't know if it's, from stories that people told me that were negative about hospitals, or because of my personal experience when I was a baby, which I don't cognitively remember, but I had an asthma attack. It's like a near-death experience in a hospital, which I have a video if you want to hear about that story. But anyway, I'm not very fond of hospitals, and my husband isn't either, so we didn't want to go to a hospital. So the midwives were like, okay, let's see if we can do a membrane sweep, which is where they put their fingers inside your vagina and through your cervix, and just I think the amniotic sac is attached to the lining of the uterus with these little hairs, and so if they sweep and break those hairs, it can kind of tell your body it's time to go into labor. But they were not able to do that to me. Even though I was 41 weeks, I was not dilated. My cervix was like hard and it was like raised up, like no signs of my body wanting to let this baby go. And so they gave us some supplements to help my body kind of prepare for labor and said, we'll try again tomorrow. And so we took all these supplements and prayed, but we went to the birthing center the next day and they checked me again. They said, your cervix is like a little bit softer, but otherwise no change. And that was really discouraging because I was still hanging on to the hope that, like, you know, there's going to be a miracle. God's going to come through and we're not going to go to the hospital because I don't want to go to the hospital. But if you've been a Christian for a while, you probably know that God doesn't always answer prayers the way you want him to answer them. So we decided to pray about it again. And we had peace about going to the hospital. But, you know, it's still like really disappointing. And so we went home and started packing our bags. And as we were packing, I started having contractions. And like I said, I didn't have contractions. Like, I didn't feel even the slightest hint of Braxton Hicks. I didn't really know what contractions felt like. But I started having contractions, and I was like, oh my goodness, I could go into labor naturally, and we wouldn't have to go to the hospital. And I had contractions for like about an hour, and they started coming closer together. And so we called our midwife, and she said, you know, just go take a bath, and, you know, if the contractions die down in the bath, it's not really labor, but if they, you know, continue or ramp up, then it is labor. So I drew a bath, and like the moment I sat down in the water, the contractions just stopped. And I waited and waited, like maybe it'll come in a minute, and it didn't. And I just like broke down crying. Because I was like, you know, when you're like disappointed and then you get your hopes up again, like maybe it'll work out after all. And then you get your hopes crushed a second time, then it's like harder than the first time. And so I was just really disappointed, and my husband and my mom prayed over me, and I felt better. And we went to the hospital. So we got to the hospital and went in a room, and I remember thinking, like, this is actually kind of nice. Like, you know, I thought hospital room's gonna be like, you know, kind of dim lighting and white walls and scratchy bed sheets, but it was kind of like a combination of a hotel room and a hospital room. Like, it had warm tones on the walls, and the floors were like the, you know, vinyl wood imitation. You know, it was still a hospital, but it was nicer than I expected. So it was about 9:30 p.m. and they decided to do a balloon, which I didn't really understand, you know, what it was until I experienced it. So they had to insert it in my cervix, which, you know, would be impossible if I wasn't dilated. And like I said, I wasn't dilated, but the lady checked me and I was 1 centimeter dilated. So she was able to do the balloon, which was just a miracle. But it was possibly the most like uncomfortable thing I'd ever experienced at that point in my life. Basically, it was like a long straw that she had to, like, you know, jam inside there, which was horrible. But, you know, I held on and I made it through, and then she like pumped it full of this fluid, and so at the end of the straw inside my womb, it filled up like this fluid balloon inside me. And so what it would do is it would press on Eden's head, and whenever I would have a contraction, Eden would like push against the balloon, and it would, force my cervix open from the inside. So they're like, we're going to leave this in for 12 hours. And at the end of that, you should be 3 to 5 centimeters dilated. I was like, okay, great. Not great, because it was not comfortable. And then they put like an extra big IV in my forearm, just in case I needed a blood transfusion, which I didn't, thank God. But that was very uncomfortable as well, every time I moved my arm. And then they had 2 monitors. It was like a little hockey puck and this big, what do you call that? Like an elastic band. 2 of them around my belly to monitor and make sure that Eden wasn't, like about to die. And then on the other arm, I had a blood pressure cuff. And so, I had taken this birth class that talked about like getting in different positions to help labor along. And, I was not like really able to move around. I just kind of had to lie there. And, if I moved at all, they would have to come in and adjust the monitors, because they're like, if we can't monitor the baby's heart rate, then we don't know if she's okay, and we're gonna have to do a C-section. And they threw that term around a lot. So I was lying there uncomfortably, didn't get much sleep. There was a lady nearby in some other room who was like hollering, lady in labor, screaming, and I was just like, I have so much to look forward to. So, in the middle of the night, the lady in the other room who was moaning and screaming finally had her baby, and we praised God, not just so we would, have a little easier time sleeping, but also just for her sake. We're very happy for her. And then the nurses came in at 5:15 a.m. and started Pitocin, and they started it at the lowest level, and they said they'd bump it up every 30 minutes. And for a while, it was fine. I was like, I was having contractions. They were kind of uncomfortable, but it wasn't, like I could handle it. I was like, oh, labor isn't too bad, But that was just the beginning. So, like I said, the balloon they put in 9:30 p.m. and it was going to stay in for 12 hours. So they were going to take it out at 9:30 a.m. But 9 a.m., just 30 minutes before they were going to take it out, I had this contraction, and I felt like my baby kind of move, and then just like a bam. I don't know if she like headbutted or like punched, but she hit the balloon so hard it shot out of me, and my waters broke, and it was a lot. It was quite dramatic, and I was like, I could not believe what just happened. But the nurse came in and checked me, and I was 4 centimeters dilated. And Pitocin was at a 12 out of 20 at that point. And they said, that my body would start to kind of take over labor since my waters had broken. So pretty soon, the contractions just came harder and faster until they were less than a minute apart, and I was hyperventilating, and my husband had brought along this pair of knee-high fluffy socks for me to wear, but I ended up not wearing them. And so he like balled them up and they became like this thing I could squeeze in my hands, which helped until I guess just from lack of oxygen, I couldn't squeeze anymore. My hands like went like this and they were stiff and I couldn't move my hands. I could not move at all. And like my face was twitching. It felt like a colony of ants was just running all over my face. And the nurse is like telling me to calm down and breathe. And I'm like, I can't. Like, I literally can't. I'm trying, I promise you. But yeah, it was just too much for me to bear. And so the RN told me about pain medication options, and one was like a gas, but she was like, that wouldn't be good because, you know, you're hyperventilating. And then another option was Stadol, which she said it was like a mild painkiller, and she was like, that's not gonna get you through labor. Like, you know, contractions are just gonna keep getting worse and worse, and, you know, basically gave me no hope that I could do this on my own. And so she recommended an epidural, and I was very, you know, did not want to do an epidural. That was another thing that I was like, it wasn't like a last resort, it was like just not an option. But in that moment, I was like, you know, I can't take this, like I'm gonna die or something. So I was like, give me the epidural. So they call in this guy, and he walks in alone, like empty hands, and is like, so you're thinking about having an epidural? And I'm like doubling over. I can't breathe, I can't move, I can't talk, and I'm just so mad, like, why did you not come with the epidural in your hands? And but the RN suggested I should take Stadol right now, and the epidural would take like 15 minutes to prepare, and if I still want it in 15 minutes, then I can take it. And I was thinking, like, I don't know if I can survive another 15 minutes of this, but of course I agreed because that was like my only option. And then we decided to call our midwife, and the midwife told us, you know, don't get the epidural, I'll be over. And so she came to the hospital. So she was able to like get me out of the bed on an exercise ball, and then my husband was doing counter pressure, and it just helped so much. She was with us for I think 2 hours, and then she got called to go to another birth. But those 2 hours that she was with us were like just the miracle that we needed. And so I didn't get an epidural, and I got through those contractions, and they turned Pitocin down, and being on Stadol, it made me kind of sleepy and a little bit loopy. So it was kind of nice because after a mostly sleepless night, and then, you know, all that exciting experience, I got to sleep a little bit, which is kind of funny to say because contractions were still about 1 or 2 minutes apart, and I was falling asleep between contractions, and then I would wake up to find myself muttering like a response to something my husband asked me in my dream, and then I wake up and I realize he's not talking to me. That was a dream. And so I was like dreaming between every contraction. It was really weird. So I was very out of it. So at this point it was 2:15 p.m. and Pitocin was back down to the lowest level, level 2, which was so nice because it was so unpleasant after my water broke. And the nurses checked me and said I was 9 centimeters dilated, and that was really encouraging. But they said, you know, you can't push till you're a 10, so don't push. But I was having like the pushing contractions where you can't resist the urge to push, and so I was like just everything within me thinking like, okay, just breathe. Don't push, just breathe. And like doing that for 2 hours. And so I was just doing my best to stay relaxed and not do anything, even though my body was telling me to push with all my might. And there were a couple times that like I couldn't resist the urge and was like, push! And I was like, no, stop pushing. But finally I decided to try to go to the bathroom because I was like, I haven't been to the bathroom in hours and I've been, you know, drinking water and stuff. So I got on the toilet. My husband helped me because with all those things hooked up to me, it was hard to move. And according to him, we were on the toilet for like 10 or 15 minutes. But I kept, you know, falling asleep and then waking up, and he's like, let's get back in bed. I'm like, no, I'm gonna try to pee. I'm gonna do it. And he's like, we've been here for 10 minutes. Just get up. Let's go back to bed. And then I started feeling the baby like going down the birth canal. And I started like kind of panicking. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have my baby on the toilet. And I was like trying to figure out like how to, you know, kind of squat over the toilet and hold my hands under. And then I was telling my husband, like, hold your hands under, the baby's coming out. And he was like, no, you're not having this baby on the toilet. Like, get back in bed. I'm like, I can't get in bed. I'm crowning. Like, you expect me to walk? And so he called the RN, and she came in, and I told her, you know, I'm crowning, like the baby's coming out. And she did not believe me. She was like, don't push, let's get you on the bed, like I gotta see if you're dilated enough to see if you can start pushing. And she was like, you could be pushing for hours and hours. And I was like moaning, like making these noises I've never made in my life. And I knew from my mom's birth story of how I was born that meant the baby's coming out. And it's kind of funny because my mom almost had me on the toilet, and then I almost had my daughter on the toilet. But by some miracle, they helped me walk back to bed, and I got back, you know, I was sitting like you're gonna do a butterfly stretch with my knees apart and my feet together. And I was like kind of reclined on the bed. And when my husband like opened up my legs, he looks and he was like, there's baby. Because you could see baby's head coming out. And the RN was like, oh no. And she started calling everybody. She, you know, she tried to stay calm, but I could tell that she was kind of freaking out. She called everyone in, and, you know, she told me not to push, like, we got to get everything ready. And so I'm just sitting there crowning, and they like get this tarp under me, everyone puts on their gloves, and I'm just like, okay, can I let this baby out now? And then they're like, okay, we're ready, you can push now. And I was like, I'm not having contractions anymore. So I just sat there for a couple minutes, and then I finally had a contraction, and I think she was out in like 2 pushes. So it was kind of comical. And I remember the nurses saying like, oh, you made that look so easy for your first time, like you barely screamed at all. I was like, well, I guess those birthing classes paid off. I remember like starting to scream one time when I was pushing her out, and then switching to like the deep ooh, and it helps. It definitely helps, but it's hard to train yourself to do that. But I only tore like the teeniest little bit. I didn't hemorrhage. You know, she was perfectly healthy. Everything was great. So it all turned out all right, but it was kind of a circus show. So, born at 4:15 p.m. So from the time they started Pitocin, it was 11 hours to the minute. When she was out, she started crying immediately. I don't remember a lot of that moment of like seeing her for the first time. I was just kind of relieved it was over and maybe a little bit in shock, just kind of like, oh, there's baby. I mean, I thought she was beautiful and I was so grateful to have her. So yeah, that's the story of my daughter's birth. Looking back, I see how we could have done a couple things differently, but you know, we were kind of naive. But I'm grateful that God was with us and He was protecting us through all of that. Even though we felt unsure and afraid and stressed, He was there and He was working it all out. The Bible says that God works all things together for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Let's pray together. God, thank You for working all things together for our good, not just the good things or the things we like, but the things that are uncomfortable, things that are scary. I know I couldn't have done that without You. You planned every step. You protected Eden. You protected me. I'm so grateful. God, whoever's watching this right now, will You reveal to them Your goodness, Your love for them, how You're protecting them and working all things together for their good. We trust You, God. Help us to trust You more. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for watching this video. If you're having a baby, I pray that your experience will be joyful and peaceful, even if things don't go how you want them to. I'll see you next time. Bye.